If we had this sort of flu-like reaction, is that something that we should continue to expect as we get these booster shots going forward?
Well, I think it's likely that you'll have some side effects of the vaccines, and actually this flu-like set of symptoms that occur after the second dose is certainly a sign that the vaccines are working. It's a sign that you've already got some degree of an immune response, and the second dose of the vaccine is actually strengthening that immune response. So it's not an unusual event to have these symptoms after vaccination. We see them after other vaccines. And as you know, even though they may be significant for some people, they're short-lived, rest for 24, 48 hours, and an anti-inflammatory medication will sometimes be all that's needed. And then after 48 hours, you generally are back to your old self. So these are really not serious events. And, and if we have to go through them again with a booster dose, that would not be a real problem.
Is there any update on how long the vaccine is effective for once you are fully vaccinated?
So for both the Moderna and the Pfizer vaccines, we now have data out 6 months after the second injection. And the data shows very strongly that the vaccines remain highly effective for at least 6 months after the second dose has been given, which means that it's very possible that that high degree of protection is going to continue for a much longer period of time. We really don't know the full duration of protection, and we won't because it's a new vaccine and we just have to follow it out. But the good news is that at least at 6 months, we have virtually the same degree of protection that was seen 1 month after the second dose of the vaccine. So that's really good news. The second issue that I think is going to turn out to be really important is that because so many people are still being infected, we have these mutations that are occurring in the virus, leading to these new variants of concern. And it's very possible that somewhere down the road, one of those variants may be less likely to be protected against with the dose of the vaccine. So one of the reasons for studying boosters is to look at these variants and see whether we can develop a booster vaccine that contains the variants of concern to try and increase the immune protection that you might get from a booster dose of vaccine against these new variants.
Let's say you got the Pfizer vaccine. Does this mean that going forward, you can only get Pfizer's shot, or could you hypothetically get Moderna's shot if it was offered to you?
Christian, it's too early to know that answer. However, we do know that a variety of vaccines that are very similarly made by a number of different vaccine manufacturing companies for certain vaccines could be interchanged over time. So we know that with the hepatitis B vaccine, we know that with the Haemophilus influenza vaccine, that if you need to change manufacturers during the course of giving the series that you need, it's not a problem. And so we won't know whether that turns out to be the same for COVID vaccines, but eventually, as we get more and more control, those studies will be done to determine whether you need to stick with the same manufacturer over time or whether you can interchange the vaccines. And that might vary based on the vaccine platform. So the mRNA vaccines may be all alike and can be interchanged. The adenoviral vector vaccines may be different, and so on. But that's going to be something that evolves over time.
Perfect. Well, doctor, those were all the questions that I had for you. Is there anything else that you want to add in there that I might have neglected to ask?
Well, the one thing I think that's very important is that it's too early to know if and when booster vaccines would be needed. So the prediction that we may have to make a decision and as early as this fall, it's possible, but it's not certain that we would have to make that decision this early. So we're just going to have to watch the pandemic evolution, watch the duration of protection before we make those decisions. And there'll be public health decisions. There'll be the same advisory committees looking at the data, looking at the variants, looking at the degree of protection, and making those decisions.